I don't think anyone really saw me. Every morning I pushed my cart down the endless hallways of the base, the wheels squeaking faintly against the polished concrete floors. My uniform was plain, my name tag smudged from years of use, and the smell of bleach clung to me like a second skin. They passed me by, men and women in sharp uniforms, boots echoing with authority. Some nodded absently. Most didn't look at all. To them, I wasn't there. Just another ghost sweeping away coffee stains and scuffed footprints from their world. I got used to it. I got used to eating lunch alone in the break room, the radio humming softly in the corner, while I stared at the same crumpled photograph tucked in my wallet. A younger version of me, hair tied back, holding my son when he was still small enough to fit in my arms. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now he was grown off in another state, busy with his own life. And I was here, cleaning bathrooms, scrubbing windows until my hands cracked and bled in winter. They didn't know my name. Not really. But sometimes, just sometimes, I caught glimpses of things they didn't see, the cracks in their confident strides, the hushed arguments behind closed doors, the tension that sat heavy in the air, like a storm about to break. I wasn't one of them. I wasn't even close. But I watched. I noticed. And deep down, a voice whispered to me, "One day, they'll remember me." It was on a Wednesday when I first heard the whispers. 2 officers strode past me, their voices low but urgent. Still no luck bringing it back online. 20 experts, and nothing. If that satellite burns up on re-entry, it'll be a damn disaster. They didn't notice me mopping the floor nearby. They never did. But my ears caught every word. A satellite, out of control, spiraling somewhere above the earth, holding what weapons, classified data I didn't know. But their faces said enough. I wrung out the mop, staring at the streaks of water shimmering on the tiles. And then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, my mind drifted back to another life. Back to late nights in a cramped apartment, fingers flying across a battered keyboard. Back when code wasn't just text on a screen, it was poetry to me. I had been good. No, more than good. My professors said I had a gift. Binary puzzles, logic, trees, languages within languages. It all made sense to me in a way that people never did. But then came the pregnancy. At 19, I traded loops and functions for diapers and formula. I told myself I'd finish my degree later, after my son was old enough. Later never came. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Waitress by day, janitor by night. Somewhere along the way, the part of me that wrote elegant algorithms got buried under bills and exhaustion. But hearing those men talk brought it all rushing back. How many nights had I dreamed of what could have been, of sitting in a clean, bright office, somewhere solving problems that mattered, instead of scrubbing other people's messes. I shook my head and forced myself to focus. I wasn't that person anymore. Yet, what if I tried just to see? Maybe I couldn't save a satellite, but maybe I could still save the smallest piece of the girl I used to be. That night, the air in the server room was colder than usual. I shouldn't have been there. My badge didn't give me access, but the door had been propped open by a cart of network cables. Someone had been sloppy. I told myself I was just passing by. But my eyes caught the glow of screens, the dance of data streams across black monitors, and my feet wouldn't move. I stepped inside. Rows of humming machines surrounded me, their LEDs blinking like restless eyes. A laptop sat open on the desk lines of code, scrolling endlessly. And there it was. The error, a memory I thought I'd buried deep, clawed its way up. Years ago, during my second year of college, I'd stumbled on the same glitch while debugging a satellite simulator. A malformed handshake packet. It caused the system to freeze, waiting for a response that would never come. My fingers twitched. I could fix this. The thought scared me. Because if I was wrong, if I touched anything, it could trigger alarms or worse. But if I was right, I looked down at my hands calloused from years of bleach and scrubbing. The hands of a cleaner, not a coder. Who was I kidding? I turned to leave, but I stopped. "They'll never see you," a voice in my head whispered. "You'll mop their floors for 20 more years, and they'll never know you existed." The voices of the officers echoed back 20 experts, and nothing. I clenched my fists. Maybe that was true. Maybe I was invisible. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, and I couldn't live with myself knowing I might hold the key, and chose silence. My heart pounded as I backed away from the desk. Not now. I wasn't ready to act yet. But tomorrow I would have to make a choice. Speak up and risk ridicule, or stay silent and watch everything burn. The control room felt like a pressure cooker. Every screen glowed with maps, graphs, and warning lights flashing in angry red. The satellite's trajectory had shifted again. If it wasn't brought under control in the next 30 minutes, it would plummet into a densely populated area. 20 of the brightest minds sat in a semicircle, their faces pale in the harsh glow of monitors. Engineers, programmers, military tech specialists. They'd been flown in from across the country for this, and still nothing. "Packet loss again," muttered one man, tugging at his tie. "Override failed. Telemetry is scrambled. We can't get a clean handshake with the satellite." Their voices overlapped, growing sharper with each update. The lieutenant general, a man with a chest full of medals and a gaze like steel, stood at the center. He gripped the edge of the console so hard his knuckles went white. "Options," he barked. A long silence answered him. "Sir," said a young technician finally, "we've run every protocol in the manual. There's nothing left to try. Nothing." That word hung in the air like smoke. The general's jaw tightened. He slammed his fist on the table, making a mug clatter. "I didn't bring you here to tell me nothing. Fix it." But no one moved. The clock on the wall ticked down, 00:29:14. Each second felt louder than the last. And somewhere in the shadows outside that room, I stood unseen, a cleaning rag in my hand, watching them crumble. I wasn't supposed to be there. But something had pulled me to that door, an instinct, a whisper I couldn't ignore. They had 20 experts. And still, no solution. I wasn't supposed to hear them. The control room doors were thick, but not thick enough to muffle the rising panic inside. I had been mopping the hallway outside, trying to ignore the shouts and the steady tick of the clock. 30 minutes before re-entry can't break the loop. It's dead code, we've lost control. Their words slipped through the cracks, like stray embers. I froze, hands gripping the mop handle so tight my knuckles ached. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. That code, that phrase, dead code. I knew what they were talking about. I knew it because years ago, before the uniforms, before the quiet halls of this military base, I'd stared at screens like theirs. I'd written lines of logic, built systems meant to hold under pressure. I'd been good at it, until life pulled me off that path. Until the day I traded late nights debugging for bottles diapers, and overtime shifts in a diner trying to hold my family together. I wasn't a programmer anymore. I wasn't anyone anymore. just a cleaner. Invisible in my gray uniform with a badge that didn't even have my last name spelled right. And yet, something inside me twisted. I had seen that error before. Long ago in the lab where I used to intern, we built a simulation module that failed in the exact same way. Garbled telemetry looping pings. Total system freeze. The solution hadn't been in the manual. It was something we stumbled on by accident. A single line of code. A patch no one thought would work until it did. What if... No. This was insane. This wasn't my place. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to swallow the pounding in my chest. The experts inside, they wouldn't listen to me. Why would they? But then I heard the general's voice low and cutting. 20 of you, and not a damn one can fix this. Millions of lives are in danger. Figure it out, or get out of my sight. And the clock ticked down. 00:26:07. The mop slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I couldn't just walk away. Not this time. I took a breath. Then another. And before I could talk myself out of it, I wiped my hands on my uniform and pushed the heavy door open. The room went silent the moment I stepped in. 20 pairs of eyes turned on me. Some startled, others annoyed. I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. "What are you doing here?" a young man in a pressed uniform snapped. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The big screen loomed at the front of the room, glowing with shifting numbers and a pulsing red circle on the radar. A satellite tumbling out of orbit. Beneath it, the countdown blinked. 00:24:19. My voice cracked. I think I might know what's wrong. Someone let out a bitter laugh. "You're the cleaner, aren't you, lady? This isn't the time." I wanted to shrink back to melt into the floor, but then my eyes caught the radar feed tiny dots, spiraling a chaotic loop. And something clicked. The memory slammed into me. A winter night, in a cramped office years ago. My mentor standing over my shoulder, frowning at almost the exact same glitch on a training simulation. "The simplest fix is often the last one people try," he'd said. "Kill the ping. Force the reset." I heard myself whisper, "The simplest fix." What the lieutenant general barked. I swallowed hard. The satellite? It's stuck in a handshake loop. You've been trying to override the system, but maybe all it needs is a hard reset. Force a timeout on the communication channel and let it reboot itself. The room stayed quiet. Then a younger tech, maybe no older than my son, muttered, It makes sense. If the watchdog process never got cleared, it's worth a shot," another voice said. The lieutenant general stared at me like he was trying to burn a hole through my skull. Then after a beat, he pointed to the tech team. "Do it." "No," I blurted. "Wait." Every head turned. If you send a full reset command, the satellite might interpret it as a shutdown and dump its onboard cache. You need to send a null ping first. Just one empty packet to break the loop. Silence. Then the young tech was typing furiously. "Null packet. Sent." We waited. The radar blipped. Once. Twice. Then the spiraling dots snapped back into orbit. The red circle turned green. 00:23:01 froze on the screen. Someone exhaled so hard it sounded like a sob. She's right," the tech whispered. It worked. A murmur ran through the room. The lieutenant general's eyes were still on me, but now there was something different in them. Recognition. For the first time in years, I felt visible. I didn't leave the room right away. After the green light flickered on the radar, people started talking all at once. Some laughing nervously, others slumping in their chairs, as if they'd been holding their breath for hours. No one was looking at me anymore. That suited me fine. I bent down to pick up my cleaning rag from the floor, trying to look busy, trying to look small. I wiped the edge of a console that didn't really need wiping, keeping my head down, but my ears open. Who was that woman? A deep voice murmured near the door. Maintenance staff. I think someone else replied, lowering their tone. She just walked in, and bam, solved what we couldn't in 5 hours. She can't have just guessed, another said. Did you see how precise her call was? That was no fluke. I felt my face flush. The rag trembled in my hand. It had been years since I heard anyone talk about me like that. Years since anyone even noticed me. But then another voice cut through the murmur sharper than the rest, or maybe we were desperate enough to try anything. One lucky shot doesn't make her a hero. I froze. That one hit harder than it should have. Was I just lucky I forced myself to keep wiping, moving along the console toward the corner of the room? The Lieutenant General's voice rose above the rest. Find out who she is, he said, and how the hell she knew about that handshake loop. I want a report in an hour. Panic shot through me. A report. What if they asked questions I couldn't answer? What if they found out I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this room? I wasn't even sure I wanted this attention. For years, I'd been invisible. And though it hurt, invisibility was safe. Comfortable, even. I gripped the edge of the console to steady myself. This wasn't the plan. All I ever wanted was to keep my head down, get through the day, and go home to my boy. And now, ma'am, I jumped. A young officer was standing behind me, frowning slightly. Are you all right? He asked. You look pale. I forced a smile. Just tired. Long shift. He nodded, unconvinced. Take care of yourself. You helped save a satellite tonight. That's something. He walked away before I could reply. I stared at the rag in my hand. My reflection wavered in the polished metal surface of the console. Who was I now? A cleaner. A coder who never finished her degree. Or something else entirely. As I turned to leave the room, a thought clawed at the back of my mind. Maybe stepping forward had been a mistake. Maybe they'd want more from me now. Answers I didn't have, skills I'd buried years ago. Maybe I'd just lit a fire I wasn't ready to control. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. I walked out of the control room, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, humming like a restless insect. I could still hear their voices in my head. Find out who she is. The Lieutenant General's tone wasn't angry. It was curious, probing, and that scared me more than if he'd shouted. I gripped the edge of my cleaning cart, rolling it slowly down the corridor. My sneakers squeaked on the polished tile. Each step felt heavier than the last. I'd only meant to help. Just that one quick fix to stop the satellite from tumbling out of orbit. But the system's warning lights kept flashing in my mind. Was it really fixed? Or had I just bought them a little more time? The thought made my stomach twist. What if I missed something? I slowed near the maintenance panel outside the server room. A small access terminal blinked faintly behind a glass cover. This wasn't part of my duties. I wasn't supposed to even touch this equipment. But old habits die hard. Years ago, I would have sat in front of a screen like this for hours, typing furiously, running endless test loops, back when I believed coding was my path to something greater, back before I quit. Don't do this, Janet, I told myself. Don't draw more attention. But my fingers were already moving. I slid the glass cover aside and tapped in a basic diagnostic command. Lines of text scrolled down the screen. Process loop pending, reset warning, handshake failure, standby mode engaged. My heart sank. It wasn't fully cleared. The satellite's link was holding, but only barely. A few more hours, maybe a day, and the system would lock up again. I swallowed hard. There was still time to fix it, but I'd need to take a bigger risk. I glanced down the hallway. Empty. Silent. I took a deep breath and typed sudo reset process. Force. The screen hesitated. A blinking cursor stared back at me like it was asking, "Are you sure?" No, I thought. I'm not. But I pressed enter anyway. The system whirred faintly. Warning lights flashed red, then yellow, then green. My pulse pounded in my ears. Come on. Hold steady. Text scrolled across the screen. Reset successful process loop. Cleared satellite stable. I let out a shaky breath. It worked. I'd bought them more than a few hours this time. Maybe days. Maybe weeks. Enough for the real experts to implement a permanent patch. Enough to keep my name out of any reports. I slid the panel shut and wiped the screen clean, erasing any sign I'd been there. As I turned away, my reflection stared back at me in the glass cover. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. A cleaner in a baggy uniform. A woman who'd once dreamed of writing code that would change the world. And maybe, just maybe, had done exactly that. I pushed the cart down the hallway, heart still racing. This wasn't over, but for the first time all night, I let myself hope it might end well. I froze. The voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Stop right there. What did you just do? Slowly. I turned. Colonel Coleman was standing at the end of the corridor, his sharp eyes fixed on me. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd been in the control room with the others, pacing, barking orders. And yet, here he was, watching me. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping closer. His boots echoed against the tile floor. My throat tightened. I was just cleaning. I stammered, gripping the handle of my cart. But his gaze flicked to the terminal behind me. The screen was blank now. I'd wiped it clean, shut the panel. It didn't matter. He knew. "You were in the system," he said quietly, almost like he couldn't believe it himself. "No," I whispered. "I wasn't. Don't lie to me." For a moment we both stood there in silence. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. "I saw the status logs update," he said, "and I saw you standing there." I felt the blood drain from my face. He took another step forward, lowering his voice. "Who are you?" Every pair of eyes turned to me. For a split second, the room fell silent. Then someone shouted, "Hey, she's not one of us. What's she doing here?" The words hung in the air like a slap. I froze, gripping the cleaning cart like it might anchor me to the floor. "She's a cleaner," another voice said sharply. What the hell was she doing at the terminal? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The big screen overhead still showed the satellite feed flickering, stabilizing, then holding steady. The countdown clock had stopped at U0:01:14, a miracle. But no one was cheering. Instead, suspicion spread like wildfire. "Wait a second," a young technician said, jabbing his finger toward me. "That process, it wasn't one of ours. She did something. That can't be right. Then how else do you explain it?" Their voices blurred together. Accusations, disbelief, fear. Then came the words that sent my stomach lurching. "Maybe she's a hacker. She planted something in the system." I felt the air sucked out of the room. "No," I said softly, my voice barely audible. "I was just Colonel." "We can't let her touch another console," someone yelled. "She could have compromised the whole operation." Colonel Coleman raised a hand, silencing the room. He looked at me with an unreadable expression, equal parts suspicion, and something else I couldn't name. "Janet," he said finally, his voice low but firm, "you're going to tell me exactly what you just did. Right now." At first my throat was dry. The weight of 20 pairs of eyes pressed on me like a vice. I could still hear the accusation echoing in my head. She's a hacker. She planted something in the system. I wasn't. God, I wasn't. I opened my mouth to speak, but fear clamped my lungs shut. I just... The words stumbled out thin and fragile. "What did you do?" Colonel Coleman repeated, his tone sharper now. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and yet his eyes, steel blue, steady, held no malice. Just a need to understand. I drew in a breath. I saw the error. I said finally, my voice trembling, "On the system logs. It looked familiar." "Familiar?" A man scoffed from the back. "You're a janitor. What would you know about system errors?" "Enough to recognize a stuck process," I shot back without thinking. The words surprised even me. Heads turned. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady. "I studied computer science years ago. I worked on debugging distributed networks for a while. Before I gave it all up. Before diapers and late bills and divorce papers." I pushed the thought down and went on. When I walked past the terminal, I noticed the logs looping over the same kernel error. It's the kind of thing that looks catastrophic, but... I paused, choosing my words carefully. "It isn't. Not always. Sometimes the process hangs, because it's waiting for a flag that never flips. If you force a reset on that specific routine, it unfreezes." The room was silent. Someone muttered, "That's impossible. We tried resets already." "No," I said softly but firmly. "You tried rebooting the entire subsystem. That's not the same. The routine I touched was isolated to the satellite's thermal control script. The system thought it was still in pre-launch mode." A long silence stretched. Then Colonel Coleman asked, "So you're saying..." "That satellite wasn't lost," I said, my voice steadier now. It just needed a nudge to remember where it was in the sequence. A beat. Then the young technician, the one who'd accused me first, snorted. "She's bluffing. Sounds like science fiction." But another voice spoke up. "Actually..." An older man with a gray beard stepped forward. His ID badge read, "Dr. Hill." "She's right. I remember a similar glitch in a test simulation years ago." All heads turned to him. Coleman's eyes flicked back to me. "You risked touching a classified terminal," he said slowly. "You understand how bad this could have gone?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. No shaking now. No stammer. But I also understood how bad it would be if nobody tried. The words surprised even me. They hung in the air for a moment before Coleman finally spoke. "All right. Stay right there." He turned to his team. "Run a full integrity scan. I want to know if her story checks out." The room felt heavy. Coleman's gaze didn't waver as the technicians behind him whispered and tapped on keyboards, trying to confirm or disprove my claims. "All right," he said, finally stepping closer. His boots echoed against the polished floor. "I have one question." I nodded, though my palms were clammy. How he asked slowly, "Does a woman mopping floors in a military base know how to fix a satellite error 20 of my experts couldn't solve?" The words were calm, but his voice carried a sharp edge. I hesitated. Do I tell them? Do I bear the whole truth? Here, in front of all these strangers who already think I don't belong, My voice faltered. Then I drew in a breath and forced myself to meet his eyes. I wasn't always a janitor. A few eyebrows lifted. I studied computer science at Purdue. I had dreams of working for NASA once I said my tone quieter now, almost confessional. But life, it didn't unfold the way I planned. There it was, the truth laid bare like a fragile thing. My husband left when my son was 3. I couldn't keep up with classes and 2 jobs. So I quit school and took whatever work would pay the bills. Cleaning was steady, reliable. It kept food on the table. No one spoke. But the judgment I feared didn't come not yet. Instead, Coleman's eyes softened just slightly. And yet, he said, his voice low, "You still noticed what my engineers missed." I shrugged faintly, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's not about titles, sir. It's about seeing the patterns. I guess I never stopped looking for them even when I stopped coding." Coleman studied me for a long, quiet moment. "Run her process through the simulator," he said to his team. The room came alive with clicks and chatter, and all I could do was stand there heart-pounding and wait. I didn't mean to remember, but standing there under the weight of Coleman's stare and the low hum of machines, my mind slipped back to another room, another life. Back then, I was 21, sitting cross-legged on a dorm room floor laptop, balanced on my knees, a half-empty coffee cup staining my notes. The code on my screen glowed like a secret. Only I understood. Professor Harris had pulled me aside that week, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've got a rare gift, Janet," he'd said. "The way you see patterns, shortcuts. NASA would kill for someone like you." I'd laughed, brushing him off, but in my chest bloomed a quiet, fierce hope. One day, I thought, I'll get there. I'll make something that matters. But life doesn't wait for your plans. It crashes in uninvited. I still remember the moment I stared down at that pregnancy test, hands trembling. My boyfriend, if you could even call him that, stared at me like I'd ruined his life. "I'm not ready for this," he said. "I can't do this." And then he was gone. I tried to keep going for a while. Classes by day, waitressing by night, the constant nausea and exhaustion, like waves pulling me under. But one night, after my shift ended, and I found myself crying in the back of the diner, clutching my swollen belly, I knew I couldn't do both. I had to choose. So I walked into Harris's office the next morning, forced a smile, and handed him my withdrawal papers. "I'll come back someday," I said. He didn't argue, just looked at me with something like sorrow and pride tangled together. But I didn't go back. Years passed. Diapers bills, late rent notices, cleaning jobs that left my hands raw and my back aching, and the code, the patterns. They stayed locked away in some dusty corner of my mind, like an old language I no longer spoke. Until today. Until a satellite on the brink and a blinking cursor reminded me of the girl I used to be. I clenched the mop handle tighter, forcing the memory down. That was a lifetime ago. But maybe, just maybe not all of it was gone. I don't remember the last time I slept without worrying about the next day. After Lucas was born, life narrowed into a single lane. Diapers, bottles, utility bills, and cheap instant coffee to keep me awake through the night feeds. At first, I tried to keep my head high. I told myself I wasn't the first single mother in the world, that other women had done this before me and survived. But the world has a way of chipping at you one small humiliation at a time. There was the landlord banging on my door when I was 2 weeks late on rent. The way he looked at me, pity laced with contempt, as I fumbled through my purse for crumpled bills. There were the job interviews that went nowhere once they heard I have a toddler. One manager actually sighed and said, "You seem bright, but we need someone reliable." Reliable. As if I wasn't pulling 16-hour days scrubbing toilets in office buildings, smiling through swollen feet, because Lucas needed formula. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning motels, folding sheets at laundromats. For a while, I worked nights at a meatpacking plant, my hands stinking of bleach and raw chicken. Every dollar mattered. Every cent went to diapers, daycare, secondhand clothes. Never enough to save. Never enough to rest. Sometimes in those rare, quiet moments, after Lucas finally fell asleep, I'd pull out my old laptop, its keys sticky and screen cracked. I'd open a coding editor just to see if my fingers remembered. For a while they did. Muscle memory kicked in. The logic felt familiar, almost comforting. But then Lucas would cry, or the power would flicker off because I hadn't paid the bill. So I closed the laptop, and each time it got harder to open it again. The years blurred together. Lucas started kindergarten. I found steadier work cleaning on the army base. The pay was just enough to keep us afloat, though barely. The soldiers never looked twice at me. To them, I was invisible, a figure in gray overalls, pushing a mop head down. Some days I didn't mind. Invisibility can be a shield. No one asks questions. No one expects anything from you. But other days, it stung. Like when I overheard a young private joking, "Hey, I didn't even realize we had cleaning staff here." Or when I passed an office where a group of engineers clustered around a whiteboard, arguing over code. Their words kernel panic overflow stack were like ghosts of a language I'd once spoken fluently. And I thought, if life had gone differently, would I be standing in there, not out here? I shook the thought off. There wasn't time for what-ifs. Lucas needed dinner. He needed school supplies. He needed me steady, not lost in dreams of what could have been. Still, something about that day that satellites spinning out of control had stirred an old restlessness inside me. And as I wrung out my mop and listened to the muffled shouts from the control room, I realized maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. "I don't understand," one of the engineers said sharply. "How could a janitor even know what a kernel panic is?" The words hit me harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here in this room filled with blinking monitors and high-ranking officers barking orders. But before I could retreat, Coleman spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Enough. The room fell silent. He turned to me, his eyes steady, but not unkind. Maybe she has been invisible all this time. Maybe the world has a habit of overlooking people like her. A pause, then softer, but not here, not now. I want to hear what she has to say. My throat tightened. It had been so long since anyone asked me to speak, really speak, and meant it. "Sir," I began, my voice trembling. I noticed the system wasn't actually offline. It was stuck in a recursive loop. I've seen that pattern before back when I used to code. "You used to code," one of the younger techs scoffed. Coleman didn't break eye contact with me. "Go on." I took a shaky breath. If you just send a soft reset signal to the secondary processor, it might break the loop. It's simple, really. But sometimes the simplest fixes are the ones people miss when they're panicking. Someone muttered, "That's insane." But Coleman only nodded slowly as if weighing the risk. and for the first time in years, I felt the faintest spark in my chest. The spark of being seen. The command center had finally quieted down. After what felt like hours, the blinking lights on the monitors had settled into a calm green rhythm. The satellite was stable again. The danger, at least for now, was over. But my hands were still trembling as I wiped down the console for what felt like the 10th time. "You don't have to do that anymore," a voice said behind me. I turned. It was Colonel Coleman. He looked different now, somehow softer without the weight of the crisis pressing on him. The sharp lines of his face seemed more human, the corners of his mouth tugging into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "It's just a habit," I murmured, setting down my rag. "Habits are hard to break." He walked closer, his boots making barely a sound on the cold tile. "You know I wasn't supposed to be here either." I frowned. "Sir." He leaned against the edge of the console. "I grew up in a small town in Texas. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses. No one thought I'd get far. Hell, half the time I didn't think I would either." I stayed quiet, unsure why he was telling me this. When I first joined the military, I failed my initial training. They told me I wasn't leadership material. Too quiet, too stubborn. He let out a dry laugh. But one instructor saw something in me, gave me a second chance. That second chance changed my life. His eyes found mine. "Tonight you reminded me of that." I didn't know what to say. "I'm just a janitor," I whispered. "You don't have to pretend I did anything extraordinary." "You're wrong." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "You saw what 20 experts missed. You trusted your instincts when no one else would have listened. That's rare. That's courage." I felt heat rising to my cheeks. It wasn't courage. It was desperation. Maybe. He nodded slowly. But sometimes desperation brings out the best in us. For a long moment we just stood there. The hum of the servers filled the silence. "You could have a future here," Janet Coleman said finally, "if you wanted it." I looked away, unsure how to respond. It had been years since anyone offered me a future that didn't involve scrubbing floors or stretching my last dollar to pay rent. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked softly. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I know what it means to finally be seen." I swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Get some rest, Janet. Tomorrow's going to be different." As he walked away, I stood there in the dim light of the control room, staring at my reflection in the polished console. For the first time in years, I didn't look like a ghost to myself. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw rows of monitors blinking at me, rows of faces turning, the cold stare of men and women in uniform demanding, "Who do you think you are?" At dawn, I sat at my tiny kitchen table in base housing, staring into a lukewarm mug of coffee. My son's photo sat propped against the salt shaker, a gap-toothed grin from second grade, the one I'd kept in my pocket through every shift. What would he think if he knew his mom was about to stand in front of generals and engineers? I flinched at the thought. Janet. I turned. Colonel Coleman stood in the doorway. He didn't knock. Just stood there like the weight of the whole building pressed down on him. "You weren't at breakfast." "I wasn't hungry." He stepped inside his boots, quiet against the linoleum. "You look like you've been wrestling with yourself all night." I gave a weak laugh. "Maybe I have." Coleman pulled out the chair across from me. He didn't sit like a superior officer. He sat like a man trying to make himself small enough to fit in someone else's world. I meant what I said last night, he said. You have a mind for this. A sharp one. I shook my head. I fixed one problem. That doesn't make me qualified. Maybe not. But 20 qualified people failed to fix it. And you saw something none of them did. I got lucky. Luck doesn't write clean code under pressure. I looked down at my hands. My nails were bitten to the quick. My palms were raw from bleach. I'm just scared, I whispered. Coleman nodded slowly. Fear's not a weakness. It's a compass. It tells you what matters. I met his gaze. You want me to? What? Today, at 0900, I want you to walk into that control room and present your solution to the team. I want you to explain in your own words how you saw what they didn't. My heart thudded. Sir, I can't. You can. His voice was calm but firm. And you will. I'll stand beside you if you need it. But they need to hear from you, Janet. I gripped the edge of the table. They won't listen to a janitor. They'll listen to someone who saved a multi-million-dollar satellite. Whether you wear a uniform or a cleaning apron doesn't matter anymore. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the image in my head rose of skeptical faces. The whisper of she doesn't belong here froze me in place. What if I fail? Coleman leaned forward. Then you fail. But you'll fail standing tall. Silence stretched between us. Finally he stood. Be in the briefing room at 0900. That's an order. I nodded faintly. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. Janet, yes, sir. Bring that sharp mind of yours. And bring your courage. The team doesn't know it yet, but they're going to need both. When he left, I sat there staring at my reflection in the coffee. Courage. It wasn't a word I'd ever used for myself. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to start. The briefing room was still hours away, but my hands couldn't stay still. I found myself back in the janitor's closet, staring at the worn wooden handle of my mop. The bristles were frayed from years of use, the metal clamp flecked with rust. How many nights had I stood here wringing out dirty water, telling myself this was all I was good for? I gripped the handle tighter and ran a damp cloth along its length. Slowly, deliberately, I wiped away the streaks of dust, the fingerprints, the grime of too many silent shifts. With every pass of the cloth, I felt something inside me shift. This mop had been my shield, my disguise, the thing that kept me invisible in rooms where I didn't feel worthy to stand. But tomorrow, I wouldn't be holding it. Tomorrow, I'd be holding my own voice. I rested the mop against the wall. It gleamed faintly under the flickering fluorescent light. Clean. Ready for someone else to use. And for the first time in years, I felt ready too. I closed the door to the closet and walked back to my quarters, my steps steady. Tomorrow, I would walk into that room, not as the janitor they forgot about, but as the woman who remembered what she was capable of. Tomorrow, I would be seen. The conference room felt colder than usual. Rows of men and women in pressed uniforms sat in silence, their eyes fixed on me as I stepped through the door. The soft hum of the projector and the faint scratch of a pen were the only sounds breaking the stillness. I had spent years walking these halls, with my head down unnoticed. But now, every gaze in this room burned like a spotlight. Janet Evans Coleman said, his voice calm but firm. She's the one who stabilized the system yesterday. A murmur rippled through the room. Some faces softened with curiosity, others hardened with skepticism. She's the janitor, one man said under his breath, though not quietly enough. Yes, Coleman replied without flinching. and she may hold the key to fixing what 20 of us couldn't. The words only made the silence heavier. I adjusted the cuffs of my plain shirt, still faintly smelling of disinfectant. My palms were damp. The words I had rehearsed all night seemed to evaporate as I looked at the expectant faces in front of me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to slip out and disappear, like I always had. But I didn't. I know I don't belong here. I began my voice quieter than I wanted. You've all spent years studying things I never even touched. I've been cleaning your floors, emptying your bins, but yesterday, when I saw the error code on the mainframe, I remembered something. A bug. From years ago. The room remained silent, but I caught a flicker of movement, a young engineer leaning forward, interest sparking in her eyes. I took a breath. I studied computer systems once. I wasn't great, but I loved it. Then life. Life took me somewhere else. I never thought I'd use that knowledge again. Someone shifted in their chair. A cough. A whisper. And then Coleman's voice cut through the tension. Janet, tell them what you told me last night. About the satellite's feedback loop. I swallowed hard. Here it was. The moment I would either prove I deserved to stand here or confirm every doubt in their minds. The conference room felt tighter somehow. Every pair of eyes fixed on me. Doubt hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke on. I took a breath and spoke, steadying my voice. The satellite's control software uses a recursive feedback loop to adjust its trajectory right. A few engineers nodded cautiously. Well, there's an old programming issue that sometimes happens in loops like that. If one variable doesn't reset properly, the whole thing spirals out of control. It's like trying to correct your steering on ice. The more you turn, the more you skid. The man in the second row, gray-haired, stiff posture, raised an eyebrow. And you're saying, that is why our satellite went rogue. Yes, I said, or at least it could be. That's why I ran a manual reset on the process yesterday. And for a moment, the satellite responded. The room erupted into murmurs. That's impossible, someone scoffed. We've combed through every line of code for weeks. It's too simple, another voice added. A janitor stumbles in, and what fixes what 20 experts couldn't? Their skepticism was sharp, almost painful. I felt my cheeks flush. My throat tightened, but then Coleman spoke. Quiet. His voice sliced through the noise like a blade. Simple doesn't mean wrong, he said. Sometimes it takes someone outside the circle to see what we missed. He turned to me. Janet, continue. I glanced at the screen behind me. Live telemetry of the satellite's unstable orbit. If we can reset the loop properly, it should stop overcorrecting. We'd regain control long enough to upload a patch. The young engineer from earlier leaned forward. What kind of reset? Are you suggesting manual override? We force the system to clear its memory registers and restart the trajectory algorithm. The gray-haired man snorted. And if you're wrong, if this goes sideways, we lose the satellite completely. I know, I said softly. But if we do nothing, we lose it anyway. Silence. Then Coleman spoke again. Janet, can you walk us through it, step by step? Yes. I approached the terminal fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the black, screen-tired eyes. Hair pulled back too tight. You'll need to disable the automated watchdog, I said, then issue a soft reboot of the control module. The sequence is simple, but has to be exact. I typed explaining each command as I went. The telemetry graph twitched. The room seemed to hold its breath. Okay, I whispered. Now, the final override. I pressed enter. The screen blinked. Once. Twice. Then the satellite's data stream steadied. Orbit correction engaged, the system announced flatly. For a beat, no one moved. Then someone let out a low whistle. "It's working," the young engineer said. Her voice hushed. The gray-haired man stared at the screen, then at me. His expression shifted from doubt to grudging respect. Coleman crossed his arms, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he said, "looks like our janitor just saved a $2 billion asset." The room erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but applause. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The applause faded, replaced by an awed silence. I stood frozen at the terminal, my hands still hovering over the keys. For years, I'd cleaned these floors, emptied these bins, and walked these halls, without a single person remembering my name. Now, all eyes were on me. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wiry with nervous energy in his posture, stepped forward. His badge read, Harris. "You didn't just fix the satellite," he said softly. "You saved all of us." I blinked at him. "All week we've been breaking ourselves trying to figure it out," Harris continued. "People are exhausted. Careers on the line. And then you—" He shook his head, a smile breaking across his face. "You reminded me why I started in this field, for solutions like this, elegant and human." A lump rose in my throat. I only did what anyone would have done," I managed to say. But even as I spoke, I knew that wasn't true. For weeks, I'd mopped my way past their debates and code reviews, keeping my head down. Part of me believed I didn't deserve to speak up, that I didn't belong. But I had. And now, they were all looking at me differently. Coleman moved closer. The room seemed to part for him. "You didn't just save a machine in the sky," he said. "You saved the pride of this team, and maybe the country's trust in us." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Janet." I took his hand slowly. The weight of it was real, grounding me in this moment. Then softly, unexpectedly, Harris started clapping again. One by one, others joined in. The sound swelled, not as thunderous as before, but warmer, more personal. And I smiled. Not the small, polite smile I wore when invisible. A real one, like someone stepping into sunlight after years in the shade. The next morning I walked into the base, with the same faded uniform and worn-out sneakers I'd worn for years, but somehow everything felt different. People nodded at me as I passed. Some even smiled. The young engineer Harris lifted a hand in greeting. "Morning, Janet." It felt strange hearing my name out loud here. When I reached the janitorial closet, I found Coleman leaning casually against the doorframe. A folder was tucked under his arm. "You're early," he said. I gave a small laugh. Old habit. He didn't smile back. Not yet. "I've been thinking about yesterday," he began. "About how you saw something 20 of my best people missed." I shifted uncomfortably. It was just luck. "No," he said firmly. "It wasn't luck. It was skill. And the kind of focus only someone who's been ignored learns to hone." Coleman handed me the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the base's logo at the top. My eyes darted across the text, Technical Apprentice. Provisional offer. What is this?" I whispered. "A chance," he said simply. "To take the seat you deserve." I felt my breath catch. "It's an entry-level role," Coleman explained. "Training included. You'll have to work twice as hard to prove yourself. But I have no doubt you can." The weight of the folder in my hands was almost too much. "I haven't coded in years," I murmured. "Then you'll relearn," he said. "You already showed me you're capable." Memories of late nights with my baby on one arm and programming textbooks on the other flooded back. The dreams I'd buried under diapers, bills, and exhaustion. "You don't have to say yes," Coleman added gently. "But I think you want to." I closed the folder carefully, my fingers trembling. For so long I thought doors like this were closed to people like me. But maybe they weren't. "Why are you doing this?" I asked softly. Coleman studied me for a long moment. "Because the world is full of quiet brilliance," he said. "It's time we started noticing it." And for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a different future. I sat alone in my tiny dorm room that night, the provisional offer lying open on the desk. The words blurred as my mind raced. Technical apprentice. It sounded impossible. Unreal. For years I'd scrubbed these floors, emptied their trash, and kept my head down. People barely saw me. And maybe that's how it was supposed to be. Was I really the kind of person who could sit behind one of those glowing consoles? Was I meant to be anything more than the woman with the mop? I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, my hands twisting in my lap. What if I failed? What if they all laughed, saying Coleman had wasted his trust on a cleaner, trying to play genius? Then I remembered my daughter. How many times had I told her to stand tall, to keep trying even when things felt impossible? How could I tell her to believe in herself if I didn't believe in me? My eyes shifted to the small window. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above the base stars, scattered like flecks of salt across black velvet. And then I saw it faint but steady, a moving point of light arcing across the heavens. The satellite. The one they'd all been working desperately to save. The one I'd helped bring back under control. A soft laugh escaped me, quiet and disbelieving. "I did that," I whispered. "Not the 20 experts. Not the advanced systems or algorithms. Me. For years I'd felt invisible, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe I'd been hiding behind my own doubts all along." I got up and pressed my hand to the cold glass. The satellite moved on in its orbit, steady and sure. "Do I deserve this?" I murmured to the stars. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. And then slowly, an answer rose from somewhere deep inside. "Yes, you do." Because I'd worked. I'd sacrificed. I'd stumbled and gotten back up 1,000 times. I'd been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside. But I had never stopped learning, never stopped thinking, even if no one saw it. This chance wasn't charity. It was recognition. A warmth bloomed in my chest, faint at first, then stronger with every breath. I wasn't going to let fear hold me back this time. I wasn't going to let this slip through my fingers. I pulled the offer letter closer and picked up a pen. My hand hovered for a moment, the weight of the decision making it hard to move. But then I signed my name, the ink flowing in steady strokes. Janet Whitman, cleaner, mother, and maybe soon, engineer. As I set the pen down, a calm determination settled over me. Tomorrow I would walk into that technical office, not as the janitor, but as someone ready to fight for her place. No more being invisible. No more doubting my worth. The satellite kept moving across the night sky, a silent witness to the promise I had just made to myself, and for the first time in years, I smiled not the tired, polite smile I gave strangers, but a real one that came from deep within. The next morning I walked past the same corridors I'd scrubbed for years, but this time I wasn't carrying a mop. This time I was carrying a notebook, my name freshly added to the roster in the technical division. People glanced at me as I passed. not the dismissive, absent-minded looks I was used to, but curious, even respectful. It felt strange. For so long I had been the ghost of this place, someone who faded into the background, someone no one would ever ask for advice or notice in a crowded room. But now, they saw me. Coleman was waiting near the entrance to the operations room, hands folded behind his back. "You're on time," he said, with a faint smile. "I wasn't going to waste my first day," I replied. We shared a brief nod, a quiet understanding between two people who'd fought their own battles in the dark. Inside, I could hear the hum of servers and the voices of engineers debating some minor calibration issue. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but then I remembered that moment, the 1 minute when everything changed. When I set the broom aside, walked over to the console, and typed in those commands as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In that single minute, I wasn't just a cleaner. I was myself again, the woman I used to be, the woman I could still become. As Coleman held the door open, I let out a steady breath. It had taken 20 years for me to get here, but maybe it's never too late to step back into the light. Sometimes all it takes is 1 minute of courage to reclaim decades of a life you thought you'd lost. And as I crossed the threshold, I whispered to myself, "This is my second chance. I'm not wasting it."